Okay, hello everybody. Appalachian Naturalist here. Welcome to my virtual outdoor classroom. Pretty neat, huh? I did that myself. Anyway, so before I get a little bit too far into the topic, a little bit of a disclaimer. My channel is not a video game channel. It's designed to be an educational channel. I don't get to talk much about extinct species very often, so I'm using this video game as an illustration and a means to reach a demographic of people I don't normally get to work with very often. I hope that by teaching you guys a little bit about these animals' amazing biology will not only enhance your gaming experience, but inspire you to learn even more, and ultimately I hope that my efforts install a sense of reverence for these extinct taxa. So, with that out of the way, what I'm going to talk about is Pternodon longiceps. This guy right over there. So, a little bit about the broad group here. These guys aren't really dinosaurs, technically. They're their own group. Basically, they're flying reptiles. And I don't want to get too much into the details of that. I'll do another video on that as well. But I have, as far as I know, every single one in the game at this point. So, we'll have a video on each of these guys. If I don't get in trouble for using the video for this one right here. Anyway, so this whole group of flying reptiles, let me see here. Oh, I'm trying to read off notes, and I haven't quite got my system figured out yet, but I'm working on it. So, generally speaking, this whole big group of flying reptiles has more or less the same ecological niche as modern-day birds. They're just much, much bigger. In fact, some of these species are the largest flying animals ever. And that's why I love some. This group is defined by having large, odd-looking head crests, and we see that from many of the species here. Well, not so much on that one. Hair has been fossilized on this group of animals, and it's not depicted on the Pteranodons, unfortunately, but it is depicted on the Quetzalcoatlus very nicely there, and back here a little bit on the Tapejara. So this body hair, they think, was used as insulation. Typically, overall, they have this group has large brains, which more or less typically, I should say, translates into complex behavior. A little bit more about the behavior later on. Their membranes are made. Their wing membranes are made out of a material called actinofibula, which basically is cross-hatched layers of cartilage. And it has fossilized in some cases, so we know what that material was made out of. Let's see here. Many had keeled breastbones there, which allows for attachment for large pectoral muscles. And it makes sense. If you're as big as this fella here and you need to get up in the air, you're going to need massive chest muscles to propel your body weight up off the ground. This lends a little bit of credence to the idea that they had powered flight and weren't just big gliders. We'll cover that discrepancy a little bit at the end of the video. Now, these guys had hollow bones, very much like birds, and perhaps more hollow than a lot of the dinosaur bones. And from what I've seen of weight estimates for this guy here, Pternodon longiceps, they're very inaccurate because the anatomy of this species here, as well as those species there, is very different than the anatomy of modern-day bats or birds. And it's hard to you can't just take the weight of a bat and then size it up to this scale and say that's probably what they weighed, because their bodies just aren't constructed the same. The bone density's not the same. Muscles probably different. And it's just it's problematic to try and guesstimate. I found some numbers, but they're so widely varying in scale. It's just not a very accurate system, or we haven't devised an accurate system yet. And perhaps one day. So, we're going to, for the rest of the video, let's forget these guys here. And we're going to talk specifically about Pternodon longiceps up here on my chalkboard. So let's go over to Pternodon longiceps. Yes, I did name it Swoop, for you Transformer fans out there. So, in 1870, the first fossils were discovered in Kansas by Othniel Marsh. They consisted of some wing bone fragments and a tooth. Remember the tooth. I'll come back to the tooth. So, all large, or almost all large flying reptiles to that point had teeth. So it was assumed that I'll just do the tooth thing now. So it was assumed that the tooth belonged to this species. So Othniel Marsh originally put this species in the Ornithocheirus genus, which is the big genus of similar animals from over in Europe and Africa, sometimes in North America, but mostly Europe and Africa and that part of the world. And there it remained until 1876, when a skull was found, and the skull had no teeth. So Othniel Marsh realized his mistake and then created a new genus, the genus Pteranodon, which literally means wing without tooth. I'll go into a little bit more detail there in a minute. So Pteranodon longiceps became the type specimen for this new genus. So a type specimen is an animal that has all the characteristics that are necessary for a group of animals. And this example just happens to be in the genus level. In 1966, another species was found in this genus. It was dubbed Pteranodon sternbergi. And the difference between the two is on longiceps, the crest on the head points out backwards. It's kind of hard to. I'll use a crosshair as a pointer. Sticks out backwards like this, and more or less is in a straight line with the beak. In Pteranodon sternbergi, I want to say sternbergii, but it's sternbergi. The crest actually comes up this way, towards the front of the head, and it's considered, or I shouldn't say considered, theorized that Pteranodon sternbergi was a descendant of Pteranodon longiceps, but I haven't really researched that to the detail that I would like, so it's a possibility. I don't know either way at this point. So that's what. Alright, so let's get into a little bit about the name. So, Pteranodon longiceps here, which I believe is the species they're going for in the game. It's in the order Pterosauria, which for the most part, all these big guys here are in the order Pterosauria. This little guy might be in a different order. I haven't researched him quite as much as I'd like to yet, but I will in a later video. So back to Pteranodon longiceps. It's in the suborder Pterodactylidae, which literally means the winged finger family. or winged finger group, I should say. And the reason for this is, take a look at the, here, let's do it this way. Aha! Take a look at the hand. You've got your claws here. You got your little digits sticking off this way. But you also have a digit coming back like this. And that's literally where the name came from, the wing finger, the pterodactyls. Now, this particular species is in the family Pteranodontidae, which literally means the toothless winged family. Wing without tooth family, more or less. Which takes me to the genus Pteranodon. So let's go over to the board and look at Pteranodon here. So I've heard some people on the internet try and pronounce the letter P. Let me see. I have trouble saying that. I've always said Pteranodon my whole life, and I did a little bit of research into this. So let's look at the genus name. Pterana. So this part here refers to wing, and from my understanding, I'm not a Greek authority on the Greek language, so if you are, put a comment or something and let me know if I got this right. But it's my understanding that this letter P is a devoiced letter. So I think I'm trying to figure out how this is Terragaia, something like that. I'm terrible with Greek. I'm sorry, guys. But at the beginning of this word, the letter P is devoiced. It's not pronounced. Much like in the name Ptolemy, spelled P-T. But if this part, the Turks part of I'm getting ahead of myself. If this part were to come in the center of the word, like in the word Archaeopteryx, the P is voiced in that case. So I haven't quite figured out the rule for why that is, but the correct pronunciation is Pteranodon. So this part here, the no part, a lot of times when you have redundant letters, you put these words together from Greek and Latin, and you have some redundant letters. Sometimes they cut those redundant letters out and just use one instead of two. But the "n" part of Pteranodon literally refers to not. There's a bunch of different ways to say that. There's no, there's a, there's nega, there's a few other ways. So let's ignore that for a second and look on the last part of the word, odon. Literally means tooth. So think of it this way: if you go to a dentist, or maybe you know someone who uses dentures. So odont literally means tooth. So Pteranodon, wing without tooth, or perhaps better, wing lacking tooth. So let's take another look at Pteranodon longiceps here. And my only real thing about the Pteranodon in this game is, unfortunately, they put the teeth in its beak. And from the fossil record, we know that they didn't have teeth. So perhaps they used a model, an older model, or a older research, or maybe even research belonging to another genus that would have had teeth. So let's go and look at the species name, longiceps here. Literally just means long. Ceps, I believe, is short for cephalus, meaning head. Literally just means long head. And let's take a let's do it this way. Let's take a step back and take a look here. Well, it has quite a long head, doesn't it? So, literally, let's do this. Literally, wing without tooth, long head is basically what the scientific name means. So, we know that Pternodon longiceps was sexually dimorphic. The males looked different than the females. The males were usually larger with elaborate head ornaments. And we see the elaborate head ornaments here. I'd call that pretty elaborate. Females were smaller and lacked the crests. Swoop here. My Pternodon is a male, and my brother's here, Sky Scorcher. Yes, he named it Sky Scorcher. Is a female, but she's got the crest there. So scientifically, she shouldn't have a crest, and neither should have teeth. But you know, I can see why you'd want one model for this species in a game instead of having two different skins for the same thing. I can see that being more logistically sound for a video game. So they're not completely devastating inaccuracies, but well, the teeth kind of are. But I let the sexually dimorphic thing fly. The females were typically smaller, and that the male wingspan on average was about 18 foot long, and then the female wingspan on average about 12 foot, with the longest in the genus being about 20.5 foot wingspan. So these things were very big, very big. Let's talk about where and when they existed. So this species, Pternodon longiceps, was around in the late Cretaceous, about 100 to 62 million years ago, in North America. Now, North America at this time looked very different than what it does today. It was divided up by three large interior seaways. The first was the Western Interior Seaway, which basically covered from southern Mexico all the way up through central United States, and it veers east a little bit, west, and goes right up across the northeastern coast of Alaska, completely splitting North America in half. The second was the Hudson Interior Seaway, which more or less started about the center of the Western Interior Seaway and went northeast through the Hudson Bay area, cutting the continent into three large sections. And then across both northern parts of these seaways was the Labrador Interior Seaway, which literally connected the northern part of the Western Interior Seaway to the northern part of the Hudson Interior Seaway, and cut that top third landmass into two landmasses. So there was actually a part of Canada that was kind of its own island in the middle of these seaways. So most of the fossils for this species were found around Kansas, Alabama, Nebraska, Wyoming, South Dakota, that whole area there. They were very likely fish eaters. Fossilized remains of fish scales, fish vertebra, and, wait for it, fish teeth. Remember that very first fossil found in 1870 that had some wing bone fragments and a tooth? Well, the tooth actually belonged to a species of fish from the northern part of the Western Interior Seaway. Now, in 1904, a plesiosaur fossil was found that had remains from a Pteranodon in its stomach. So these guys were probably not top apex predator in the food web, but they probably weren't actively hunted by plesiosaurs. They're probably a snack of opportunity, much like a tiger shark will occasionally go after albatross fledglings, but they don't exclusively hunt albatross Let me try that sentence again. Tiger sharks don't typically hunt exclusively albatross fledglings. There we go. I would guess that was just a snack of opportunity. Perhaps the Pternodon went to snag a fish out of the water, and the plesiosaur was in the right place at the right time, or perhaps the Pternodon died, and the plesiosaur snacked on the carcass, or something like that. Ecologically, Pternodon longiceps probably lived in a very similar way to modern marine colony nesting birds, kind of like gannets or puffins. So I can see these guys amassing in very large groups of more than two, sitting on a cliff, nesting and fighting and competing and just being Pternodon longiceps. Now, from the fossil record, is kind of split. For just about every male fossil we find, there's about 2 female fossils, which suggests a polygynous lifestyle, basically, polygynous is more females than males, and the males have to compete, oftentimes vigorously, for the favors of the females. So that could point to the crests, the unusual crests found on the male fossils, and perhaps why the female fossils didn't have crests, because the crests were a probably not a fighting device in this example, but a display device to try and impress the ladies. Now, you're probably wondering what the door is about. And that's just a size comparison. In real life, I couldn't figure out a good way to do this. So, in real life, a doorknob is right at about 1 yard off the ground, pretty close to a meter off the ground. So I just threw a door here as sort of a general guesstimation of size. I'm assuming that measure holds true in this game, which it may or may not. I have no idea. But we take a step back and look at the size of these Pternodon longiceps in comparison to right about that doorknob there. It'd be about 1 yard, or perhaps a little shorter, or right around a meter or a yard. And they're scaled fairly accurately in this game. We go back to the wingspan of the male being 18 feet. We can kind of step back and say, well, that's 1 yard there, so that's probably 1, maybe close to 2 yards there. And then we could go the whole way along the wing, and they're fairly close in size. So I'm pretty happy with that. I mean, they're certainly taller than my guy here. Let's see here. So let's get into a little bit of a discrepancy here. So it's uncertain, well, there's two major discrepancies about not just unique to Pteranodon longiceps here, but the other flying reptiles as well. And that, firstly, is the debate on powered flight versus gliding. Sort of the older school idea is they were just big gliders, but we see from the fossil record that many of them had attachment points for very strong pectoral muscles, which are necessary in powered flight. I mean, good God, can you imagine how much muscle mass it would take to move a wing that size? Especially if you're working against gravity and lifting a body of that size. These things had to be tremendously strong in the upper body. I tend to think that they all had powered flight. That's my personal take on it, just because of the shape of the breastbone, and it just makes good sense to me. Some people, however, believe that they were just big gliders, and then other people believe that perhaps the bigger ones were just gliders, and perhaps the smaller ones had powered flight. So that's still up for debate to a degree. And then terrestrial movement, whether they were bipedal or quadrupedal. In this game, they're all quadrupedal, which is awesome because that's how I believe they walked. And I support the theory of quadrupedalism versus bipedalism because it just seems weird to see. Well, maybe you grew up in the 80s and 90s and you saw cartoons of these things walking on the ground, and they were just walking with their back feet, and their wings were kind of like sticking out the side, and they just looked very unrealistic and, in my opinion, quite stupid. This seems much more realistic. Let's hop on one and just walk a little bit here. Oops. There. And take a look at the motion of this walking. That looks scientifically sound to me. Not that I'm an authority on this, but there was a trackway discovered recently. I want to say that it was in Australia. I need to double check because I just found out about it last night, and it's basically a fossilized trackway of probably not this species, some other species, but the trackway had prints for all 4 legs. You could actually look at the trackway, and I might try and get a link for that or something. But you can see the motion for the movement, which is very similar to this game. So I don't know if they looked at that trackway when they designed or did the animation for Pternodon in the game. That'd be sweet if they did. Yay, science! So I think, but the quadrupedalism, I support quadrupedalism just because bipedalism just looks ridiculous on these guys. So there you go. Alright, so until next time on Appalachian Naturalist's virtual outdoor learning space here, I'll catch you guys